You know, there's something absolutely fascinating about the way we humans approach life. We walk around with our hands in tight fists, clutching at everything we can get our fingers on. Money, relationships, plans, ideas about who we should be, what we should achieve, how things ought to turn out. And then we wonder why we feel so tired, so anxious, so perpetually dissatisfied. It's rather like trying to carry water in your cupped hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. But cup your hands gently, and the water rests there, cool and refreshing. This morning I want to talk to you about one of the most liberating discoveries you can make in this lifetime. That the more you let go, the more life gives you. Not less, more. And I don't mean this as some sort of mystical promise or spiritual bargaining chip. I mean it as a practical, observable fact about how existence actually works. But first, let's be clear about what we mean by letting go, because there's a tremendous misunderstanding about this. People think letting go means becoming passive, indifferent, or irresponsible. That if you let go, you'll lose your ambition, your care for others, your ability to get things done. This is nonsense. Complete nonsense. Letting go is not about dropping out of life, it's about dropping into life. It's the difference between swimming upstream, against the current, exhausting yourself in the struggle, and learning to move with the water, using its power to carry you forward. Think about a master musician. When a violinist plays, are their fingers gripping the bow with desperate intensity? Of course not. Their grip is firm enough to control the bow, but relaxed enough to let the music flow. If they held too tightly, the music would sound forced, mechanical. If they held too loosely, there would be no music at all. There's a perfect middle way, a dynamic balance between holding on and letting go. This is exactly how we need to approach life, not with the death grip of someone terrified of losing control, but with the confident relaxation of someone who understands that control was always an illusion anyway. You see, we live under this tremendous delusion that we're supposed to be the directors of the cosmic play. That if we just plan hard enough, worry sufficiently, control tightly enough, we can make everything turn out according to our wishes. But life has other ideas. Life is like a great river, and we are like leaves floating on its surface. We can choose how we float, but we cannot choose where the river goes. The person who hasn't learned to let go spends their entire existence fighting the river. They paddle frantically, trying to go upstream, wearing themselves out in a battle they can never win. The person who has learned the art of letting go discovers something marvelous. They find they can navigate the currents, they can choose which branch of the river to follow, they can even influence the direction of their flow. But they do it by working with the water, not against it. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this perfectly. There once was a man who owned a beautiful garden. He spent every waking moment tending it, worrying about it, trying to control every aspect of its growth. He would stand over his plants, demanding that they grow faster, straighter, more beautiful. He would rage at the weather when it didn't cooperate. He would lie awake at night, anxious about pests and diseases and all the things that might go wrong. And you know what happened? His garden was mediocre at best. The plants seemed stunted, stressed, lacking the natural vitality that makes a garden truly magnificent. Then one day, exhausted by years of this struggle, he simply gave up. Not in the sense of abandoning the garden, but in the sense of surrendering his need to control every detail. He continued to plant, to water, to weed, but he did it with a different quality of attention. He did his work, and then stepped back. He allowed the garden to be itself. The result was magical. The plants began to flourish in ways he had never seen. The garden developed its own personality, its own rhythm, its own unique beauty. By letting go of his need to control, he had given the garden the space it needed to become everything it could be. This is exactly what happens in our lives. The more we release our grip on how things should be, the more space we create for things to be wonderful, in ways we never could have imagined. But here's where it gets really interesting. Most of us are terrified of letting go because we think it means we'll lose everything. We think that if we're not constantly vigilant, constantly striving, constantly worrying, everything will fall apart. This fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality. You are not separate from the universe. You are not a small, isolated being struggling to survive in a hostile world. You are the universe itself, expressing itself as you in this particular time and place. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the fear of letting go begins to dissolve. Think about your heartbeat. Do you have to remember to make your heart beat? Do you lie in bed at night, consciously controlling the rhythm? Of course not. Your heart beats by itself, perfectly, efficiently, without any effort from your conscious mind. This is not because you're careless or irresponsible. It's because your heart is part of a vast intelligence that knows exactly what it's doing. In the same way, your life is part of this same vast intelligence. When you let go, you're not abandoning control to chaos. You're allowing the deeper wisdom of existence to work through you. Here's something that will amaze you. The things you're most afraid of losing by letting go are often the very things that are holding you back from receiving what life really wants to give you. That job you're hanging on to out of fear, even though it makes you miserable. By letting go of your fear of insecurity, you open yourself to work that actually fulfills you. Those plans you've made about how your life should unfold, by releasing your attachment to them, you allow life to surprise you with possibilities far more wonderful than anything you could have planned. This doesn't mean you stop making plans. It doesn't mean you become passive about your relationships or your work. It means you hold your plans lightly, like a bird resting in your palm, firm enough that it feels secure, gentle enough that it can fly away when it's time. The Chinese have a beautiful concept called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-action or effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with the natural flow of things. It's the difference between forcing a door that's stuck and finding the right way to open it. The door opens either way. You see opportunities that you missed when you were focused only on your predetermined goals. You attract people and circumstances that align with your true nature, rather than fighting for things that were never right for you anyway. But perhaps most importantly, you discover peace, real peace, not the temporary relief that comes from getting what you want, but the deep, unshakable peace that comes from knowing that you're exactly where you need to be, receiving exactly what you need to receive in every moment. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or that you never face challenges. It means you face challenges from a completely different place. Instead of being the victim of circumstances, you become a curious participant in the great dance of existence. Problems become puzzles to solve rather than disasters to avoid. Difficulties become opportunities for growth rather than evidence that life is against you. Let me share something with you that might sound paradoxical. The more you let go, the more you actually receive. But what you receive is often different from what you thought you wanted, and that's the beauty of it. Life knows better than you do what will actually make you happy. Your mind thinks it knows what you need. It has its little list: more money, a better job, a perfect relationship, recognition, security. And it spends tremendous energy trying to acquire these things. But life, in its infinite wisdom, knows that what you actually need is to become the kind of person who can fully receive and appreciate whatever I've done. When you let go, you stop being so focused on getting that you begin to notice what you already have. And what you already have is extraordinary. You have consciousness, the ability to experience anything at all. You have this moment with all its unique flavors and possibilities. You have breath moving through your body, keeping you alive without any effort from you. You have senses that can perceive beauty, a mind that can understand and create, a heart that can love. When you really see this, when you really feel the abundance that's already here, your relationship with wanting changes completely. You stop grasping desperately for more and start appreciating fully what is. And when you do this, something magical happens. More comes to you, but it comes as a gift rather than as something you've struggled to obtain. Think about the people you most enjoy being around. Are they the ones who are constantly needy, always grasping for your attention or approval? Or are they the ones who are comfortable with themselves, who don't seem to need anything from you, who give their attention and energy freely? Obviously, it's the second type. These people are magnetic because they've learned the secret of receiving by giving, of getting by letting go. When you stop needing so desperately, when you let go of your attachment to outcomes, you become like this. You become someone that life enjoys giving to, because you're not coming from a place of scarcity and demand. You're coming from a place of fullness and trust. Here's another way to look at it. Imagine you're at a feast, but you're so focused on hoarding the bread rolls that you don't notice the incredible meal being offered all around you. You leave the feast feeling hungry and dissatisfied, clutching your stale rolls, having missed the real banquet entirely. This is what most of us do with life. We focus so intently on acquiring and protecting the few things we think we need that we miss the incredible abundance that's being offered to us in every moment. The art of letting go is learning to trust that the feast is real, that there's enough for everyone, that you don't need to hoard anything because more is always being offered. But how do you actually practice this? How do you learn to let go when every instinct screams at you to hold on tighter? Start small. The next time you're stuck in traffic, instead of raging against the delay, practice letting go. You can't control the traffic, but you can control your response to it. Breathe. Listen to music. Use the time to rest your mind. Notice how much more pleasant the experience becomes when you stop fighting what is. The next time someone criticizes you, instead of immediately defending yourself, pause. Let the criticism exist without needing to fix it or fight it right away. You might discover there's something useful in it, or you might realize it says more about them than about you. Either way, you don't need to let it disturb your peace. The next time you have a plan that doesn't work out, instead of seeing it as a failure, see it as life offering you a different path. Maybe it's a better path. Maybe it's teaching you something you need to learn. Maybe it's protecting you from something you can't see yet. Practice holding your opinions lightly. You don't have to abandon your beliefs, but you can stop being so attached to being right. When someone disagrees with you, you can be curious rather than defensive. What if they have a piece of truth that you haven't considered? What if there's room for both perspectives? Practice with your emotions. When fear arises, don't automatically try to get rid of it. Let it be there, so feel it completely. Often, when we stop fighting our emotions, they transform on their own. Fear can become excitement. Anger can become clarity. Sadness can become compassion. The more you practice these small acts of letting go, the easier it becomes to release your grip on the bigger things. You begin to develop what I call relaxed confidence. You do your best, you make your plans, you take your actions, and then you release the outcome to the larger wisdom of life. This doesn't make you passive or ineffective. Quite the opposite. When you're not wasting energy on worry and control, you have much more energy available for actual creativity and productivity. When you're not attached to one specific outcome, you can see multiple possibilities and choose the best one. When you're not defending yourself constantly, you can actually hear what life is trying to tell you. Here's something beautiful that happens when you truly learn to let go. You discover that you were never really in control anyway. That sense of control you were fighting so hard to maintain was always an illusion. The universe has been taking care of you all along. Your heart has been beating, your lungs have been breathing, your food has been digesting, your cuts have been healing, all without any conscious effort from you. Once you see this, Once you really understand that you're being supported by an intelligence far greater than your worried mind, letting go stops feeling like falling and starts feeling like flying. The ultimate letting go is the realization that there is no separate you to let go in the first place. You are not a drop of water trying to survive in the ocean. You are the ocean, temporarily expressing itself as a drop. When you truly understand this, the fear of loss dissolves completely, because what can the ocean lose? But even if this ultimate understanding seems too abstract, you can still practice the art of letting go in very practical ways. And as you do, you'll discover something wonderful. Life becomes more fun. When you're not taking everything so seriously, when you're not desperately trying to control outcomes, you can enjoy the process. You can appreciate the surprise plot twists. You can laugh at the cosmic jokes. You become like a child playing in a garden, delighted by whatever flowers bloom, curious about what will happen next, not worried about whether the garden is growing according to some predetermined plan. And here's the final, beautiful irony. The more you let go, the more you discover that you already have everything you were looking for. Not because you've acquired more things, but because you've remembered how to see the abundance that was always here. The love you were seeking was already in your capacity to love. The security you were chasing was already in your ability to meet whatever comes with presence and grace. The happiness you were pursuing was already available in your willingness to appreciate this moment, exactly as it is. So I invite you to begin today. Pick one small thing that you've been gripping too tightly. A worry, a plan, an expectation, a need to be right. And gently, like opening your hand to release a bird, let it go. Don't do it with drama or effort. Do it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that whatever is meant to come will come, and whatever is meant to go will go. And then watch. Watch what happens when you create that space. Watch how life rushes in to fill it, often with something more beautiful than anything you could have planned. This is the great secret that the sages have whispered through the ages, that you don't have to earn love, or fight for security, or grasp for happiness. These things are your birthright. They come to you naturally when you stop blocking them with your fear and control. The more you let go, the more life gives you, not as a reward for good behavior, but as the natural result of removing the obstacles to what was always trying to flow to you anyway. So, let go and learn what it means to be truly magnificently alive. The water is waiting to support you. All you have to do is stop fighting it and learn to float.
Have you ever caught yourself in a moment of quiet solitude and wondered, who exactly is this person that I call myself? This peculiar entity that walks about, makes decisions, has opinions, likes certain things and dislikes others? Is there really some authentic you beneath all the layers of social conditioning, expectation and performance? Or is this whole pursuit of finding your true self perhaps the very thing keeping you trapped in a magnificent illusion? Today I want to explore with you what might be one of the most fascinating puzzles of human existence, this burning desire to know who we really are, to be authentic, genuine, and true to ourselves. And yet the harder we look for this elusive, authentic self, the more it seems to slip through our fingers like water. What a marvelous predicament, wouldn't you agree? It's quite extraordinary, this modern fixation we have with finding our authentic self. Everywhere you turn, there's another book, another teacher, another method promising to help you discover the real you beneath all the masks. Be yourself, they say. Be authentic. As if somewhere within you there exists a solid, definable core, the real you, waiting to be uncovered like buried treasure. But I want to suggest something rather subversive. What if this desperate search for the authentic self is actually the very thing preventing you from living authentically? Isn't that a delicious paradox? You see, the moment you begin hunting for your authentic self, you've already created a division, a split between the hunter and the hunted, the seeker and the sought. You've established yourself as someone who is currently inauthentic, but who might, with enough effort and introspection, eventually become authentic. And so begins an endless quest, always reaching, always becoming, never arriving. This reminds me of the Zen story about the man riding a donkey, searching far and wide for a donkey. How absurd it would seem to others watching him. But my friend, they might say, you're already sitting on the donkey you're looking for. And so it is with our search for the authentic self. What we fail to recognize is that authenticity isn't something to be achieved through effort, but rather something that manifests naturally when we cease pretending to be something we're not. But here's the trick, and it's a marvelous one. How can you stop pretending to be something you're not if you don't know who you really are? Around and around we go. Perhaps the first step in this unusual exploration is to consider whether this authentic self we're all so desperately seeking actually exists in the way we imagine it does. Could it be that what we're looking for has no fixed form, no permanent substance? What if, instead of a solid core, our authentic nature is more like the flowing of a river, never the same from one moment to the next, yet always itself? From the moment we enter this world, we begin our apprenticeship in what I like to call the grand theater of identity. You see, none of us arrives on the stage of life knowing our lines. We learn them bit by bit from the players around us, our parents, teachers, friends, and all the colorful characters who populate our early years. Think about it as a child. You didn't know how to be you. You had to learn it. You observed how Daddy behaved when he was angry, how Mommy expressed love, how your teacher showed approval. And gradually, through this process of imitation and reinforcement, you constructed a repertoire of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that you came to identify as yourself. Isn't it fascinating? The very self you think of as most genuinely you is largely composed of borrowed gestures, adopted opinions, and rehearsed emotions. Like a method actor who has been playing the same role for so long that he's forgotten he's acting, I'm reminded of the traditional masks of the No theater in Japan. These masks are designed with such subtle craftsmanship that when the actor tilts his head in different ways, the mask appears to express completely different emotions. Tilt up slightly and the mask seems to smile. Tilt down and it appears to frown. Our personalities function in much the same way they're masks we've learned to tilt just so, depending on the situation. But here's where it gets particularly interesting. Over time, we forget that we're wearing masks at all. We become so identified with our performances that we mistake them for our essential nature. The businessman believes he really is a businessman, through and through. The mother believes motherhood is her true identity. The intellectual can't conceive of himself as anything other than a thinking being. And yet, beneath all these performances, who is the performer? Who is the one wearing all these masks? If you strip away every role you play, every title, relationship, belief, and characteristic, you identify with what remains. This is where our exploration begins to get wonderfully slippery. Let's dig a bit deeper into this curious notion of the borrowed self. I want you to take a moment and consider any opinion you hold dear. Perhaps it's a political view, a religious belief, or simply your preference for a certain type of music. Now ask yourself, is this truly your original thought? Or is it something you've absorbed from your culture, your upbringing, your education? The uncomfortable truth, and it is delightfully uncomfortable, is that very little of what we consider to be our thoughts are actually our own. They're fragments we've collected, ideas we've inherited, beliefs we've been persuaded to adopt. Even the language in which you think isn't your own creation. It was given to you, and with it came all sorts of implicit assumptions about how the world works. Consider how differently you might conceive of yourself if you'd been born in ancient China or medieval Europe or among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. The very categories through which you understand your existence would be entirely different. The line between yourself and others might be drawn in a completely different place. And it's not just our thoughts and beliefs that are borrowed. It's our desires as well. How do you know what to want? How do you know what success looks like, what happiness feels like, what love should be? These aren't innate, they're learned. You were taught what to desire, what to pursue, what to avoid. So much of what we call the self is like a collage, bits and pieces snipped from magazines, pasted together to create the illusion of a coherent picture. Your taste in clothes, influenced by your culture and peer group, your ambitions, shaped by your family's expectations and societal values, your fears, many of them inherited or learned from others' experiences. But if so much of what we consider to be ourselves is actually borrowed, what does this mean for our quest for authenticity? Is there anything left that's genuinely you? Or is the self merely a convenient fiction, a story we tell to create the comforting illusion of continuity and coherence in our lives? Now we come to one of my favorite paradoxes in this whole business of selfhood. The paradox of self-improvement. The idea that yes, you can somehow make yourself into a better version of yourself. What an extraordinary notion. Think about it for a moment. When you embark on a journey of self-improvement, who exactly is improving whom? There seems to be a you that is doing the improving, and another you that needs to be improved. But how can you be both the improver and the one needing improvement is less than #0. 5# is greater than. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. This curious situation arises because we've accepted a fundamental premise that may not be true, that there is a solid, separate self that exists apart from everything else. This self, we believe, can be worked on, polished, perfected. But what if this premise is flawed? What if the self is not a thing at all, but rather a process, a flowing, changing current of experience that has no fixed essence? I'm reminded of the Buddhist notion of anatman, or no self. This isn't saying that you don't exist, that would be absurd. It's suggesting that you don't exist as a separate, independent entity with a fixed essence. Rather, you exist as a dynamic pattern of relationships, constantly changing, constantly in flux. From this perspective, the whole enterprise of trying to become more authentic, more yourself, begins to look rather peculiar. It's like trying to make a river more river-like. The river isn't trying to be anything, it simply flows. Its nature is to change, that is its constancy. And herein lies the great irony. The more desperately you strive to be authentic, the further you drift from true authenticity. Because authentic being isn't something you achieve through effort, it's what remains when you stop efforting altogether. It's what you are when you're not trying to be anything in particular. So perhaps the path to authenticity doesn't involve adding anything to yourself, more knowledge, more virtue, more awareness. Perhaps it involves subtraction, removing the layers of pretense, expectation, and identification that obscure your natural being. Not building yourself up, but letting yourself down. Not becoming, but unbecoming. Now, here's another fascinating wrinkle in our exploration of the authentic self, this peculiar expectation of consistency. Somehow we've come to believe that to be authentic means to be consistent. The truly authentic person, we imagine, would always be the same, reliably expressing the same preferences, holding the same values, exhibiting the same behaviors, regardless of the situation. But I want to ask you, is anything in nature consistently the same? Look at the ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent. Look at the sky, sometimes clear, sometimes clouded. Look at any living creature, sometimes active, sometimes at rest. Consistency is not the way of nature, it's the way of machines. And yet we demand this mechanical consistency of ourselves and others. I thought you were the kind of person who, we say, or that's not like you, as if a person should be a fixed and predictable thing. We feel troubled, even guilty, when we find ourselves behaving differently in different contexts, playful with certain friends, serious with others, confident in some situations, hesitant in others. Which is the real me, we wonder. But what if authenticity has nothing to do with consistency? What if, on the contrary, authentic being involves a kind of intelligent responsiveness to the unique demands of each situation, is less than #0? 5# is greater than. Just as water takes the shape of whatever container it's poured into, perhaps our authentic nature flows differently, depending on the circumstances. I'm reminded of the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing, it means acting in accordance with the natural flow of things rather than imposing your will upon them. The master sailor doesn't fight the wind. He works with it, adjusting his sails according to its direction and strength. And in doing so, he's being utterly authentic, responding appropriately to what is, rather than clinging to some fixed idea of how things should be. Perhaps true authenticity, then, isn't about maintaining a consistent self-image, but about being present enough to respond genuinely to life as it unfolds. Sometimes that response might be anger, sometimes compassion, sometimes laughter, sometimes tears. The authentic person isn't afraid to be multifaceted, contradictory, unpredictable, in other words, fully human. So instead of asking, is this behavior consistent with who I think I am? Perhaps we might ask, is this behavior a genuine response to the present moment? The first question keeps us trapped in a fixed identity. The second opens us to the flowing river of authentic being. Let's venture even deeper into this peculiar puzzle of the self. Many of us, in our quest to know ourselves, adopt the position of an observer watching our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I notice that I'm feeling angry, we might say, or I'm watching my thoughts arise and pass away. This seems like progress. We're no longer fully identified with our experiences. We have some distance, some perspective. But here we encounter another fascinating paradox. Who exactly is doing the observing? If you are observing your thoughts, then you must be something other than your thoughts. But what is this observer? Isn't it just another thought? And if so, who's observing that thought? We seem to enter an infinite regression, like those Russian dolls that contain smaller and smaller versions of themselves. It's rather like trying to see your own eyes. Your eyes can see everything except themselves. You might use a mirror, of course, but then you're not seeing your eyes directly, you're seeing a reflection of them. Similarly, whatever you observe about yourself is not your true nature, but a reflection, a representation, a model of it. This is the essential bind we find ourselves in. The self cannot be an object to itself. The knower cannot be the known. And yet we persist in this impossible task, trying to grasp our own nature as if it was something separate from the very awareness that's doing the grasping. In Zen, they call this trying to catch your own shadow. No matter how fast you run, your shadow keeps pace with you perfectly. You can never get behind it to see what it really looks like. And why? Because the shadow isn't a thing apart from you, it's an inseparable aspect of your relationship with the light. Similarly, your self isn't a thing that exists independently, waiting to be discovered. It's more like a process, a dynamic relationship between awareness and its contents. It's not something you can grasp, because the very grasping is itself an expression of what you're trying to grasp. Oh, what a marvelous puzzle it is. So perhaps the search for the authentic self isn't about finding something, but about recognizing the fundamental nature of finding itself. Not about grasping an object, but about understanding the very process of grasping. Not about knowing something, but about the nature of knowing itself. And now we arrive at what might seem at first glance to be a rather depressing conclusion. There is no solid, permanent, independent self to be found. No fixed essence that defines you once and for all. No unchanging core beneath all the layers of conditioning and performance. But wait. Before you sink into existential despair, consider this. What if this apparent absence is actually the gateway to a profound freedom? What if the discovery that there is no solid self to find is the very discovery that sets you free? You see, if there's no fixed self, then you're not bound to be any particular way. You're not constrained by a permanent essence or nature. You're free to flow, to change, to experiment, to play with different ways of being. You're not a finished product, but an ongoing process, constantly creating and recreating yourself in relationship with the world. In Buddhism, this insight is known as shunyata, often translated as emptiness or voidness. But it doesn't mean that nothing exists. It means that nothing exists in the way we normally think it does, as a separate, independent entity with its own inherent nature. Everything, including our sense of self, exists in dependence on causes and conditions, in relationship with everything else. Think of a rainbow. It appears when certain conditions come together: sunlight, moisture in the air, a particular angle of vision. It seems to have a definite location, definite colors, a definite shape. And yet if you went looking for the rainbow as a solid object, you'd never find it. It's a pattern, a relationship, a process, not a thing. And so it is with the self. The freedom of no self isn't the freedom to be whoever you want to be that's still caught in the idea of a chooser separate from what is chosen. It's the freedom to be what you already are, a fluid, responsive, ever-changing expression of the universe. Not a noun, but a verb. Not a fixed entity, but a flowing process. When you cease grasping for an authentic self, when you stop trying to define yourself, improve yourself, find yourself, something unexpected happens. The very energy that was bound up in this futile search is released, and what remains is a natural authenticity that was there all along, hidden in plain sight. Not a self that you found, but the freedom from the need to find one at all. Now, here's something rather curious about our pursuit of authenticity. The more deliberately we try to be authentic, the less authentic we become. It's a bit like trying to be spontaneous. The very moment you decide to be spontaneous, true spontaneity has already vanished. You're caught in a peculiar bind where the conscious attempt undermines the very quality you're trying to embody. Consider the difference between calculated authenticity and genuine spontaneity. Calculated authenticity says, "How should I act in order to be true to myself?" It's concerned with appearances, with measuring up to some ideal of authentic behavior. It's self-conscious, effortful, and paradoxically highly inauthentic. Genuine spontaneity, on the other hand, isn't concerned with being authentic at all. It simply responds to the moment without calculation, without reference to a self-image or ideal. It's unself-conscious, effortless, and paradoxically profoundly authentic. I'm reminded of the Zen approach to archery. The beginner is very self-conscious, constantly thinking about their posture, their grip, their breathing, their aim. But the master doesn't think about these things at all. The master becomes one with the bow, the arrow, the target. There's no separation, no self-consciousness, just the flowing movement of archery itself. Similarly, true authenticity isn't achieved by constantly monitoring yourself, asking, "Am I being authentic now?" It emerges naturally when you're so completely engaged in what you're doing that the question doesn't even arise. When you're playing music, and you are the music. When you're dancing, and you are the dance. When you're in conversation, and you are the conversation. Not a separate self performing these activities, but the living activity itself. This is why children often seem so authentic to us. They haven't yet learned to be self-conscious. They don't ask themselves, "How should I play in order to be true to my nature as a player?" They simply play. Their laughter, their tears, their anger, their joy all arise spontaneously, without calculation or reference to a self-image. The irony is that in our pursuit of authenticity, we've become more self-conscious, more calculated, more performative, in a word, less authentic. We've lost the unself-conscious spontaneity that is the very essence of authentic being. So perhaps the path to authenticity isn't about trying to be more authentic, but about releasing the very effort to be anything at all. Not adding something to yourself, but letting go of the constant self-monitoring, self-judging, self-improving activity that keeps you separate from the spontaneous flow of life. Let me share a radical perspective with you. What if your entire life, everything you consider most serious, most important, most real, is actually a form of play? What if all your striving to be authentic is itself a kind of pretending? What if we're all engaged in an elaborate game of make-believe, but we've forgotten that it's a game? Consider how children play. A child might say, "Let's pretend I'm the mummy and you're the baby." And in that moment, they become fully invested in their roles. The mummy speaks in a grown-up voice, makes dinner, puts the baby to bed. The game is serious business, but at the same time, at some level, the child knows it's a game. There's a delicious double awareness being the mummy and knowing you're pretending to be the mummy both at once. As we grow older, though, we tend to lose this double awareness. We become so identified with our roles that we forget we're playing. The businessman doesn't say, "Let's pretend I'm a businessman." He believes he really is a businessman, through and through. The professor doesn't say, "Let's pretend I'm a professor." She takes her role with utmost seriousness as her real identity. But what if all our identities, all our roles, all our supposed authenticity is just as much a form of play as the child's game? What if we're all pretending all the time, but we've forgotten that we're pretending? This isn't to say that life isn't real, or that our experiences don't matter. It's to suggest that perhaps there's a way of engaging with life that combines full commitment with a light touch, like the child who is both completely immersed in being the mummy and yet knows with a wink and a nod that it's all a wonderful game. Perhaps true authenticity, then, isn't about finding your real self as opposed to your fake self. It's about recognizing that all selves are, in a sense, performances, but performances that can be engaged in with either heavy-handed seriousness or with playful delight. The Hindus have a wonderful concept for this Leela, the divine play. The idea that the entire cosmos is God's play, a grand game of hide and seek where the infinite consciousness pretends to be all these finite forms, all these separate selves, only to eventually remember its true nature and exclaim with delight, "Oh, it was me all along." So perhaps the question isn't, who am I really, but rather, how am I playing the game of being me? Am I playing it with grim determination, constantly worried about getting it right? Or am I playing it with the light touch of someone who knows it's a game serious, yes, but a game nonetheless? We've journeyed quite a distance together, haven't we? We've explored the pursuit of authenticity, the theater of identity, the borrowed self, the paradox of self-improvement, the myth of consistency, the observer and the observed, the freedom of no self, spontaneity versus calculation, and the game of pretending. And now we arrive at our final contemplation, moving beyond the very categories of authentic and inauthentic altogether. You see, as long as we're caught in the dichotomy of authentic versus inauthentic, we're still playing within the framework of a separate self that can be one or the other. We're still assuming there's a real me hiding beneath all the conditioning and performance, a genuine article waiting to be discovered or unleashed. But what if we step out of this framework entirely? What if we recognize that there's no authentic self hiding behind the inauthentic one, just as there's no real wave hiding behind the apparent wave is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The wave isn't pretending to be a wave, it's just the ocean waving. Similarly, you aren't pretending to be you, you're just the universe youing. From this perspective, the question of authenticity becomes meaningless. It's like asking whether the oak tree is being authentic when it grows toward the sunlight, or whether the river is being authentic when it flows downhill. These things simply are what they are, doing what they do, without any question of authenticity arising. And so it could be with us. Instead of striving to be authentic, we might simply allow ourselves to express whatever arises naturally in each moment, without labeling it as authentic or inauthentic, real or fake, genuine or artificial. Just this, just now, just the ongoing, ever-changing flow of experiencing itself. This doesn't mean abandoning all discernment or ethical consideration. It doesn't mean that anything goes. It means recognizing that true discernment arises naturally from clear seeing, not from measuring yourself against some ideal of authenticity. It means that ethical action flows from an understanding of interconnectedness, not from adherence to a rigid code of authentic behavior. In Zen, they speak of the state before thinking creates the division between subject and object, self and other, authentic and inauthentic. They call it ordinary mind, or original mind, not some special spiritual state, but the simple, direct experience of reality before we slice it up with our categories and judgments. Perhaps this is what true authenticity is, not a quality of a separate self, but the recognition that there is no separate self to be authentic or inauthentic. Just this moment of experiencing, complete and perfect as it is, just the universe expressing itself as you, in all your glorious particularity, without any need to be other than you are. So here we are, at the end of our exploration, although of course it isn't really an end, is it? More like a doorway, opening onto further inquiry, further discovery, further unfolding. We began by asking whether you know who you are, or have merely learned to pretend. And we've discovered something rather marvelous, that the very distinction between knowing and pretending, between being and appearing, between authentic and inauthentic, may itself be part of the grand illusion. Perhaps the most authentic thing we can do is to recognize that authenticity isn't something to be achieved, but something that manifests naturally when we cease trying to be anything in particular. Not a quality to be cultivated, but the natural expression of our being when all cultivation ceases. So I invite you to consider, what if you stopped trying to know who you are? What if you stopped trying to be authentic? What if instead you simply allowed yourself to be as you are in this moment, not as some fixed, definable entity, but as this flowing, changing, ungraspable process of experiencing itself? In the words of a Zen master, when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep. Simple, direct, unmediated by self-consciousness or calculation. Just this. Just now. The authentic life may not be the one where you've finally discovered who you really are, but the one where the very question no longer seems relevant. And in that falling away of the question, in that release of the endless searching and striving, something unexpected may emerge, a spontaneous authenticity that was there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting only for you to stop looking for it in order to reveal itself as what you already are. Not the discovery of the authentic self, but the discovery that there is no self to be authentic or inauthentic, just the universe expressing itself as you, perfectly and completely, in this moment and this and this. And isn't that a wonder? I'm going to let you in on a secret. The most enlightened people throughout history haven't been the most serious. They've been the ones who saw through the charade, who caught a glimpse behind the cosmic curtain and couldn't help but laugh at what they found there. You see, somewhere along your journey you've been sold quite the bill of goods. This peculiar idea that life is an extraordinarily grave affair, filled with important problems, crucial decisions, and weighty consequences. But what if, just what if, this seriousness itself is actually the primary obstacle between you and the most profound understanding of existence? What if the universe is not a drama but a dance? Not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Let's explore together the cosmic joke that's been playing out right under your nose all this time. Now, the first thing we must understand is this peculiar phenomenon of seriousness. What exactly is it? When you look at a serious person, what do you see? A furrowed brow, tense shoulders, a certain weightiness to their movements. It's as if they're carrying something tremendously heavy, isn't it? But I want you to consider, what exactly are they carrying? You see, from the moment you were small, you were taught that certain things matter terribly. Your grades in school, your behavior at the dinner table, whether you'll amount to something in life. And as you grew, this list of terribly important matters only expanded. Your career, your reputation, your retirement account, the impression you make on others, the weight keeps accumulating until many people stagger through life absolutely crushed by the imagined significance of it all. But here's what I find absolutely fascinating. If you travel to different cultures, you'll discover that what's considered deadly serious in one place might be utterly trivial in another. The American businessman racing against time would appear quite mad to a Taoist sage sitting by a river. The Hindu mystic's concerns would seem entirely alien to the Wall Street broker. So, doesn't this suggest something rather remarkable? That seriousness isn't inherent in the world at all, but rather it's something we've manufactured. I'm reminded of a Zen story about a monk who asked his master, "What is the most valuable thing in the world?" The master replied, "The head of a dead cat." "Why?" asked the perplexed monk. "Because no one can put a price on it," answered the master. You see, the things we take most seriously are often precisely the things that have no intrinsic value whatsoever. They're simply agreements we've made with each other. Consider money, for instance. We behave as if pieces of paper with particular markings are matters of life and death. But if you were suddenly dropped on a desert island, would those pieces of paper matter at all? Not in the slightest. You'd be far more interested in coconuts and fresh water. The grand illusion of seriousness begins to unravel when we recognize that what we're taking so seriously is, in many ways, arbitrary. It's as if we're all playing an elaborate game but have forgotten that we agreed to play it in the first place. And so we strain and struggle and worry, never realizing that we could at any moment remember that it's just a game and instantly transform our experience. Now, let's dive deeper into this curious matter of seriousness and examine one of its primary sources. That peculiar entity you call me or myself or I. Isn't it fascinating how incredibly important this I seems to be? You see, most of us walk around with a rather extraordinary assumption. The assumption that we are these isolated entities, these separate selves, desperately trying to make our mark on the universe. We have this strange feeling that we're enclosed in a bag of skin, peering out at a world that is not us. And from this perspective, everything becomes dreadfully serious. Because if I am this tiny, fragile thing in an indifferent universe, then I must constantly defend myself, assert myself, prove myself. But what if this whole notion of the separate self is actually the cosmic joke's punchline? You see, in my explorations of Eastern philosophy, I've discovered something rather startling. This feeling of being a separate self, this ego that seems so solid and important, is actually more like a brilliant optical illusion. It's a useful fiction, a convenient way of organizing experience, but not an ultimate reality. Consider this. Could you have any experience of being you without the rest of the universe? Could you experience yourself as something separate without everything that is supposedly not you? Of course not. The experience of being a separate self absolutely requires the whole show. The air you breathe, the ground you stand on, the people you interact with, the entire cosmos stretching back to the beginning of time. So you are not in the world. You are an expression of the world. Just as a wave isn't in the ocean, but is what the ocean is doing at that point. The universe isn't something that you're in, it's something that you're out. Like an apple tree apples, the universe peoples. And that includes you. Now, when you begin to glimpse this, something marvelous happens. This desperate need to prove your importance starts to dissolve, because you realize that you are already as important as the stars and the mountains and the entire cosmic dance itself. Not because you've achieved anything special, but because you are an expression of the whole magnificent show. Think of how much energy we waste trying to be important. All the posturing, the anxiety about what others think, the constant internal monologue assessing how we're doing. It's exhausting, isn't it? And it's all based on a misunderstanding that you need to be important in the first place. The myth of the important self is perhaps the heaviest burden we carry. And yet it's one we can set down the moment we recognize it for what it is, a case of mistaken identity. You are not this isolated ego desperately seeking validation. You are the universe experiencing itself from a particular point of view. And that is both utterly ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. What I find most fascinating about human beings is how we've managed to transform play into painful obligation. You know, if you watch children at play, they are completely absorbed. They're present, they're engaged, they're delighted, and yet they know they're playing. There's a wonderful lightness to it all. But somewhere along the line, something very curious happens. We start to take the game of life with tremendous seriousness. It's as if we were playing a game of Monopoly and suddenly became convinced that our very survival depended on acquiring Boardwalk and Park Place. We'd grip those little pieces of paper money with white knuckles, our hearts pounding with anxiety. We'd lie awake at night plotting our next move. Wouldn't that be absurd? And yet, isn't that precisely what we've done with life? You see, society is, in many ways, an elaborate game. Money, status, achievement, these are the rules we've collectively agreed upon. But the problem arises when we forget that these are conventions, not cosmic laws written into the fabric of reality. Consider how we measure success. We've created these extraordinary yardsticks: how much money you make, what position you hold, how many people know your name. And we've convinced ourselves that these measurements reveal something profound about our worth. But who invented these yardsticks? We did. It's as if we've written the rules of a game, forgotten that we wrote them, and now find ourselves in abject misery trying to win at all costs. I'm reminded of the Hindu concept of Maya, often translated as illusion. But Maya isn't just any illusion. It's specifically the illusion that the game is not a game. It's forgetting that we are playing. And in this forgetting, we transform what could be a magnificent dance into a grueling marathon. Now, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't engage with life's games. Far from it. Play the games with gusto, with passion, with all your heart. But play them knowing they're games. As the Hindus say, God is playing hide and seek with himself. The deepest part of you already knows this is all a divine game. That's why when you become too serious, something in you starts to feel suffocated. You know, when I lecture, people often ask me, "But Alan, if we stop taking things seriously, won't society collapse? Won't we all just lie around doing nothing?" But I'm not advocating for apathy or nihilism. I'm suggesting something far more subtle, that you can be fully engaged with life while maintaining a certain lightness of being. Like a good actor who is completely committed to their role, yet never forgets they're in a play. So ask yourself, what games have you forgotten are games? Where in your life have you transformed play into painful obligation? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than, and what might happen if you remembered the playful nature of existence, even as you continue to participate fully in all of life's dramas? Now, I want to talk about something absolutely essential to understanding this cosmic joke: the liberating power of laughter. Have you ever found yourself in a situation so absurd that you couldn't help but laugh? Perhaps you were terribly angry at someone, working yourself into quite a state, when suddenly you caught a glimpse of how ridiculous you looked, fists clenched, face contorted, and you just burst out laughing at yourself. That moment of laughter is a moment of tremendous insight. It's a sudden shift in perspective where you step outside the drama and see it for what it is. And in that stepping out, there's an extraordinary liberation. You see, the universe is filled with the most delightful absurdities. Consider the human predicament for a moment. Here we are, these peculiar creatures with oversized brains, desperately trying to figure it all out. We've created elaborate systems of thought, massive institutions, complex technologies, and for what? To solve the problem of being alive. But what if being alive isn't a problem in the first place? I'm reminded of a Zen koan. What did your face look like before your parents were born? It's a question designed to short-circuit the logical mind, to create a kind of cognitive hiccup. And in that hiccup, sometimes we catch a glimpse of the cosmic joke. We realize that all our efforts to secure ourselves, to make absolute sense of everything, are a bit like trying to bite our own teeth or look at our own eyes without a mirror. The yogis of India have a wonderful concept called Leela, which means divine play. They suggest that the entire cosmos isn't a grim machine grinding away for some purpose, but rather a kind of spontaneous play, a dance, a game that exists for its own sake. And if that's true, then all our desperate seriousness is a bit like someone at a party refusing to dance because they're too busy analyzing the chemical composition of the floor. Now, there's a particular kind of laughter I'm talking about here. It's not the nervous laughter that masks discomfort, nor the cruel laughter that puts others down. It's a kind of cosmic chuckle that arises when you see through the charade, when you recognize the beautiful absurdity of taking anything, including yourself, too seriously. The Zen masters often used absurdity deliberately to awaken their students. When asked profound questions about the nature of reality, they might respond by pointing to a cypress tree in the garden or shouting a nonsensical word. Not to be deliberately obscure, but to jolt the questioner out of the trap of thinking that reality could be captured in concepts. You know, we have this peculiar idea that enlightenment or awakening must be terribly serious business. We imagine the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree with a grave expression, having profound thoughts. But what if, when he realized the ultimate nature of reality, he didn't nod solemnly but burst out laughing? What if the appropriate response to the mystery of existence isn't reverence but delight, is less than #0? 5# is greater than, so I invite you to cultivate this capacity for seeing the absurd, for catching the cosmic joke. Not as an escape from life, but as a portal into a more authentic way of being. Because when you can laugh at the fundamental absurdity of being a separate self trying to figure it all out, something wonderful happens. You relax. And in that relaxation, paradoxically, you become more fully alive, more present, more capable of genuine engagement with this marvelous dance we call existence. Let's explore more deeply this fascinating concept I mentioned earlier, the Hindu notion of Leela, or divine play. You see, in Western religious thought, we've often imagined that the universe exists for some purpose, some end goal. We ask, what is the meaning of life? As if meaning were something separate from life itself, some external justification. But the Eastern view offers something quite different and, I think, profoundly liberating. It suggests that existence itself is a kind of play, a dance, a game that the divine, or what you might call consciousness, or the Tao, or whatever word you prefer, is playing with itself. Think about it this way. Why do we play games? Not to arrive at the end as quickly as possible. That would defeat the whole purpose. No, we play to play. The meaning of the game is in the playing itself. When children dance, they're not trying to get somewhere. The dancing itself is the destination. And what if the entire cosmos is like this, is less than #0? 5# is greater than, what if, as the Hindus suggest, the absolute reality which they call Brahman is playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with itself. It divides itself into all these seemingly separate forms, into you and me and the stars and the mountains, and then it pretends it doesn't know what it's done. It pretends to be all these individual entities, all for the sheer delight of the game. Now, if you begin to see existence this way, something remarkable happens. You stop asking what's the point of it all, because you realize that's like asking what's the point of dancing, or what's the point of playing music. The point isn't to get to the end. The point is the playing itself. I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a very serious young man who was studying to be a concert pianist. He was practicing 8 hours a day, driving himself mercilessly, all to prepare for some future moment when he would arrive as a great pianist. But in all his striving, he'd forgotten why he started playing piano in the first place, because he loved it. The music itself was the reward, not some future state of having succeeded. And isn't that how we often approach life? We're so focused on arriving somewhere, on achieving some future state of happiness or success, that we forget to enjoy the journey itself. We transform what could be a beautiful dance into a grueling march towards some imagined promised land. The art of divine play invites us to flip this perspective entirely. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. What if this moment, exactly as it is not a means to an end, but the end itself? What if life isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced? This doesn't mean we can't have goals or work toward things we value, but it transforms how we hold those goals. Instead of tense striving, there's a kind of playful engagement. Like a good game of tennis, you're trying to win, yes, but more than that, you're enjoying the back and forth, the dance of it. So I invite you to experiment with this perspective. What might change if you approached your life as divine play rather than serious business? What if you saw yourself not as a separate entity struggling in a difficult world, but as the universe itself playing at being you for the sheer joy of the game? How might that transform your experience right now, in this very moment? One of the things that makes the cosmic joke so delicious is the way it's absolutely saturated with paradox. And by paradox, I don't simply mean contradiction, but rather those fascinating situations where seemingly opposite truths somehow coexist. You see, the Western mind has been conditioned to think in terms of either divided by or something must be either true or false, good or bad, meaningful or meaningless. We are uncomfortable with ambiguity, with things that don't fit neatly into our conceptual boxes. And this discomfort leads us to take rigid positions, to become terribly serious about defending our particular view of reality is less than #0. 5# is greater than. But what if the nature of reality itself transcends these neat categories? What if, as the Eastern sages suggest, the deepest truth is not either divided by or but both divided by and? What if opposites aren't really opposed at all, but more like the north and south poles of a single magnet? Consider some of the paradoxes that lie at the heart of existence. We are simultaneously incredibly significant and utterly insignificant. From one perspective, you're just a tiny speck in an infinite cosmos here for the briefest moment. From another, you're a unique expression of the universe itself, without whom the entire show would be different. Both perspectives are true simultaneously. Or consider the paradox of control. We spend enormous energy trying to control life, to bend it to our will. And yet, our efforts at control often lead to greater suffering, while our moments of greatest fulfillment often come precisely when we let go. It's as if we must simultaneously engage fully and surrender completely. How wonderfully absurd. The Taoists have a beautiful concept called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-doing or effortless action. It's the art of acting without forcing, of accomplishing without striving. Like a good surfer who doesn't fight the wave but moves in harmony with it. The surfer is simultaneously in control and surrendered, active and passive. You can't say it's either one or the other, it's both at once. I'm reminded of a Zen story about a master who was asked, "What is the meaning of Zen?" Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. He replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The questioner was perplexed. "But doesn't everyone do that?" "No," said the master. "When most people eat, they're thinking about 1,000 other things. When they sleep, they're dreaming 1,000 dreams. They're never fully present with what they're doing." This is another fascinating paradox. The more we try to make life meaningful by searching for some grand purpose, the more it tends to feel empty. But when we simply engage with what's right in front of us, when we fully taste the apple, or listen attentively to a friend, or lose ourselves in creative work, meaning arises spontaneously, it's not something we add to experience, it's what happens when we stop trying to add anything to experience and simply allow it to be what it is. The cosmic joke, you see, is that we take ourselves so seriously precisely because we haven't understood how profoundly significant everything already is. We're like fish swimming frantically in search of water. So I invite you to dance with paradox rather than trying to resolve it. To hold opposing truths simultaneously with a certain lightness of touch. To recognize that life is simultaneously deeply meaningful and utterly meaningless, that you are both everything and nothing, that the wisest approach may be to care deeply while holding everything lightly. This dance with paradox isn't something you figure out once and for all. It's more like a constant balancing, a kind of existential tightrope walk. But there's a peculiar freedom in it, the freedom that comes when you stop trying to collapse reality into a single definitive interpretation, and instead allow it to be as complex, as contradictory, and as mysterious as it actually is. One of the most delightful aspects of the cosmic joke is how it turns our conventional notions of wisdom and foolishness completely upside down. Throughout history, the truly wise have often appeared as fools to their contemporaries, while those considered wise by society have frequently been the most deluded of all. Consider the court jester, the only person allowed to tell the truth to the king without losing his head. By adopting the guise of a fool, he gained the freedom to be wise. Or think of the Zen masters with their nonsensical koans and unpredictable behavior, deliberately violating social norms to awaken their students. Or the Taoist sages who advocated returning to the state of the uncarved block, a kind of holy simplicity that sophisticated society mistook for ignorance. You see, there's a certain kind of intelligence that can only be accessed through what appears to be foolishness. The overly serious mind, the mind full of knowledge and certainty, actually becomes quite rigid and blind. It can only see what it already knows, can only find what it's looking for. But the fool's mind, the beginner's mind, is open to surprise, to discovery, to seeing things as they actually are, rather than as they're supposed to be. I'm reminded of Jesus' saying that unless you become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. What did he mean by this? I think he was pointing to the natural wisdom of children, who haven't yet learned to take the social game with deadly seriousness, who still see with fresh eyes, who still know how to play. You know, if you watch a child at play, there's a kind of natural wisdom there. The child is completely present, totally absorbed in what they're doing. They haven't yet learned to divide life into important and unimportant parts. It's all important because it's all happening now. The leaf they're examining is as fascinating as any philosophical treatise. The mud pie they're making is as significant as any corporate merger. And there's a profound wisdom in this non-discriminating attention. As we grow older, we're taught to be sensible, which all too often means conforming to social expectations and abandoning our natural spontaneity. We learn to filter our perceptions through a grid of concepts, judgments, and evaluations. We stop seeing the world and start seeing our ideas about the world. And in this process, something essential is lost. The fool, in the spiritual sense, is one who has unlearned this conditioning, who has returned to a kind of holy naivete, not by rejecting knowledge, but by holding it lightly, by refusing to let concepts replace direct experience. The fool knows that the map is not the territory, that the menu is not the meal, that the word water will not quench your thirst. In Zen, they speak of beginner's mind, a mind free from preconceptions, open to all possibilities. The master Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's mind there are few." This is the wisdom in foolishness, not a rejection of knowledge, but a refusal to be imprisoned by it. So I invite you to cultivate a bit of the holy fool in yourself, to question your most cherished assumptions, to look at the world with fresh eyes, to be willing to appear foolish in the pursuit of a deeper wisdom. Because sometimes the quickest way to break free from the trap of excessive seriousness is to be willing to play the fool, to laugh at yourself, to make light of what you've been taking so heavily, to dance when others think you should be marching. Remember, it's not about rejecting responsibility or depth. It's about finding a different kind of responsibility, a different quality of depth, one that includes lightness, playfulness, and the willingness to not know, to be surprised, to see with the fresh eyes of a child while drawing on the rich perspective of an adult. That, to me, is the essence of wisdom, a wisdom that often looks remarkably like foolishness to a world caught in the grip of seriousness. Now let's examine one of the cleverest aspects of the cosmic joke, the way we're perpetually sacrificing the present moment on the altar of some imagined future. Isn't it fascinating how we're always preparing to live, but never quite living? Always getting ready for some moment that never seems to arrive. You see, we have this peculiar habit of living for tomorrow. We tell ourselves, when I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. When I find the right relationship, then I'll be content. When I retire, then I'll finally start living. And in this perpetual postponement, we miss the only moment we ever actually have, this one, right now. It's as if we're constantly saving up our money for a journey that we never take. or preparing for a feast that we never sit down to enjoy. What an extraordinary way to waste a life. And underlying this habit is a fundamental misunderstanding of time. We think of time as a line stretching from the past through the present into the future. But is that really how we experience it? Have you ever experienced the past directly? Or is the past always a memory, something happening in the present moment? And have you ever experienced the future directly? Or is the future always an anticipation, something happening in the present moment? What if time isn't a line at all, but more like a point that keeps blossoming into now and now and now? What if, as the mystics have been saying for centuries, there is only ever this eternal present moment? I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a businessman who told me proudly that he'd spent the last 20 years working 60-hour weeks to build his business. And now, he said, I can finally start enjoying life. But I had to ask him, what makes you think you have 20 more years? What makes you think you even have tomorrow is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The trap of tomorrow is that it never actually arrives. Tomorrow is always 24 hours away. When tomorrow becomes today, it's no longer tomorrow. So if we're living for tomorrow, we're living for something that doesn't exist except as an idea in our minds right now. This doesn't mean we shouldn't plan for the future. Of course we should. But there's a world of difference between planning for tomorrow and living for tomorrow. Planning happens in the present. It's an activity we engage in now. Living for tomorrow means treating the present merely as a means to an end, as a step on the way to somewhere else. You know, it's quite amusing to watch how seriously people take their plans. They map out 5-year strategies and 10-year goals as if the future was something they could control. But the future is always uncertain, always unfolding in ways we couldn't possibly predict. Life has a way of surprising us, of upending our best-laid plans. And perhaps that's part of the cosmic joke too, that we take our plans so seriously when life itself is so fundamentally unplannable. It's like trying to rehearse a conversation before it happens. You can imagine what you'll say, but the actual conversation will always unfold differently because it involves another person, another consciousness with its own unpredictable responses. The real tragedy of living for tomorrow is that it robs us of the only thing we ever have, the exquisite, unrepeatable moment of now. When we're always preparing to live, we miss the simple wonder of being alive. The taste of tea on the tongue, the sound of wind in the trees, the feeling of connection with another human being. So I invite you to catch yourself, when you fall into the trap of tomorrow, to notice when you're treating the present as merely a means to some future end, to ask yourself, what if this moment, exactly as it is not a stepping stone to somewhere else, but the destination itself? What if the purpose of this moment is simply to be this moment? Because when we stop living for tomorrow and start living in the eternal now, something remarkable happens. The weight of time falls away. The burden of becoming someone or getting somewhere dissolves. And what remains is a curious lightness of being, a natural joy that arises not from achieving anything in particular, but from the simple fact of being alive in this extraordinary universe. Now, I'd like to explore some practical ways to release ourselves from the burden of imagined significance to cultivate what we might call the liberation of lightness. Because understanding the cosmic joke intellectually is one thing, but actually living with this awareness is quite another. You see, we're creatures of habit. We've been conditioned to take life terribly seriously, and this conditioning runs deep. It's embedded not just in our thoughts, but in our bodies, in the way we hold ourselves, in the very rhythm of our breath. So how do we begin to unwind this conditioning? How do we learn to hold life more lightly? First, I think, is simply bringing awareness to our patterns of unnecessary seriousness. Start to notice when you're gripping life too tightly. You might feel it as a physical tension, a tightness in your shoulders, a furrowing of your brow, a shallowness in your breath. Or you might notice it in your thinking, a repetitive worry, a rigid judgment, a desperate need to control the uncontrollable. When you catch yourself in the grip of this excessive seriousness, don't judge yourself for it. That would just be adding another layer of seriousness. Instead, See if you can bring a gentle curiosity to it. Ah, there I go again, treating this as if the fate of the universe depended on it. The Zen masters have a wonderful practice called not knowing mind. It's the practice of deliberately letting go of our certainties, our fixed views, our need to have everything figured out. Can you experiment with this? Can you allow yourself to not know, to be surprised, to see things with fresh eyes? Another powerful practice is to deliberately lighten up about things that you normally take very seriously. If you're someone who's terribly concerned about your appearance, try going out one day without spending any time on it. If you're someone who always has to be punctual, try being 10 minutes late and see if the world ends. These little experiments can begin to loosen the grip of our compulsive seriousness. Laughter itself is a tremendous medicine. Not taking myself so terribly seriously doesn't mean I can't care deeply about life. It means that I care deeply without the crushing weight of self-importance. And humor is one of the quickest paths to this state. The ability to laugh at ourselves, to see the absurdity in our most earnest efforts, is a profound spiritual capacity. I'm reminded of the Tibetan concept of crazy wisdom, a kind of spiritual approach that deliberately violates conventional expectations in order to awaken people from their slumber of seriousness. The crazy wisdom teacher might answer a profound philosophical question by throwing a pie in the questioner's face, not out of disrespect, but out of compassion to help them break free from the prison of concepts and experience reality directly. Now, I'm not suggesting you start throwing pies at people, but I am suggesting that there's a kind of wisdom in playfulness, in not always following the expected script. Can you bring more play into your life? More spontaneity? More willingness to color outside the lines? And perhaps most fundamentally, can you begin to question the story of the separate self that needs to prove its importance? Can you start to glimpse that you are not this isolated ego desperately trying to assert itself in a foreign universe, but rather an expression of the universe itself? That you belong here intrinsically, without having to earn your place? Because that, I think, is the deepest source of our excessive seriousness, this feeling that we have to justify our existence, that we have to earn our right to be here. But what if you already belong completely, without having to do or prove anything? What if your worth is not something you achieve, but something inherent in your very being? The liberation of lightness comes when we begin to see through the illusion of the separate self, when we recognize our fundamental belonging in the universe. From that recognition arises a natural joy, a spontaneous gratitude, and a curious kind of weightlessness. We're still engaged with life, still participating fully in all its dramas and adventures, but we're no longer crushed by the need to make it all work out according to plan. We've caught the cosmic joke, and in that catching, found a freedom that no amount of earnest striving could ever provide. As we come to the final chapter of our exploration, I want to share with you what I consider the ultimate punchline of the cosmic joke, the extraordinary possibility that the universe itself is laughing at itself through you. You see, throughout human history, we've tended to imagine the fundamental nature of reality as either utterly impersonal, a vast machine grinding away without purpose or awareness, or as something like a cosmic parent figure with very definite ideas about how we should behave. But what if both these conceptions miss the mark? What if, as the Upanishads suggest, the underlying reality, Brahman, is not separate from your own deepest awareness? What if consciousness isn't something you have, but something you are? What if your sense of being aware isn't a property of a separate self, but the very same awareness that animates the entire cosmos is less than #0. 5# is greater than, in the Hindu tradition, they speak of Satchitananda being consciousness, bliss. These three, they say, are not separate qualities, but different aspects of the same ultimate reality. To exist is to be aware, is to be joy. And this reality is not something outside you that you have to reach for, but the very core of what you already are. Now, if that's true, then something quite astonishing follows. Your awareness right now, reading these words, is not different from the awareness that's been present in every creature that's ever lived, that's shining through every star and flowing through every atom. It only appears separate because of the peculiar game that consciousness is playing with itself, the game of pretending to be divided into separate selves. And why would consciousness play such a game? For the same reason that you play any game, or watch any movie, or read any novel for the delight of it. For the thrill of surprise, of limitation overcome, of unexpected discovery. For the sheer joy of experiencing itself from countless different perspectives. In this view, the entire cosmos is a kind of divine play, a game of hide and seek that awareness is playing with itself. It divides itself into seemingly separate forms, and then gradually, through the process we call evolution or awakening, it remembers its true nature. And in that remembering, there's an exquisite delight, a cosmic laughter. I'm reminded of a wonderful Zen story. The student asks the master, "What happens when you die? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than..." The master replies, "I don't know." Shocked, the student says, "But you're a Zen master." The master smiles and says, "Yes, but I'm not a dead Zen master." There's a profound truth in that story. No one knows what happens when you die, not because it's some great mystery, but because the you that's asking the question is precisely what disappears. It's like asking, "What happens to my fist when I open my hand?" The question contains a fundamental confusion, because the fist isn't a thing but a temporary configuration. Similarly, what if this sense of being a separate self isn't a thing but a temporary configuration? What if your true nature is the awareness in which this temporary self appears, rather than the self itself? What if death is not the end of awareness, but simply the end of a particular lens through which awareness has been temporarily looking? From this perspective, your deepest nature is not something vulnerable that needs to be protected, not something incomplete that needs to be fulfilled, not something flawed that needs to be perfected. It's already whole, already complete, already perfect. The only problem is that you've momentarily forgotten this, caught up in the game of being a separate self. And that forgetting is not a mistake or a tragedy. It's an essential part of the game. Just as you can't play hide and seek if you know where everyone is hiding, consciousness couldn't play this magnificent game of life if it didn't temporarily forget its true nature. So the cosmic joke is that what we're all desperately searching for, unconditional love, perfect security, complete freedom, pure joy, is not something we need to attain. It's what we already are. We're like fish swimming frantically in search of water, or like someone running through their house looking for their glasses when they're already wearing them. And when you begin to see this, not just intellectually, but in your direct experience, there arises a peculiar kind of laughter. Not the laughter of mockery or even of humor exactly, but the laughter of recognition. The laughter that comes when you suddenly get the joke that's been playing out all along. It's the universe laughing at itself through you. It's awareness delighting in its own disguise. It's the cosmic game recognizing itself as a game. And in that recognition, paradoxically, the game doesn't end. It continues, but now with a lightness, a playfulness, a joy that was missing when you were taking it all so terribly seriously. You're still fully engaged in life, still responding appropriately to whatever arises, still participating in all the dramas and adventures. But you're no longer burdened by the crushing weight of self-importance, no longer imprisoned in the belief that your happiness depends on things working out a certain way. You've caught the cosmic joke, and in that catching found a freedom that no amount of earnest striving could ever provide. You've discovered that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced, not a serious drama, but a divine play. And in that discovery there's a kind of homecoming, a return to the joy that is your birthright, the bliss that is your true nature. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a simple invitation. Take a moment right now to feel the weight of your body, to hear the sounds around you, to notice the rhythm of your breath. And in that noticing, see if you can sense something deeper, the awareness that's present in all these experiences, the consciousness that's reading these words right now. That awareness, that consciousness, is not something small and vulnerable inside your head. It's the very fabric of the universe looking at itself through your eyes. It's the mystery at the heart of existence experiencing itself as you. And when you glimpse this, even for a moment, the cosmic joke reveals itself, and all the heaviness of being a separate self trying to make it in a difficult world dissolves into laughter. Not because life's problems aren't real within their context, but because the context itself is so much vaster, so much more mysterious, so much more playful than we'd imagined. So I invite you to loosen your grip, to take yourself a little less seriously, to allow a little more play into your life. Not as an escape from responsibility, but as an expression of the deepest truth that the universe is not a solemn duty, but a joyful dance, not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And in that living, in that dancing, you might just catch a glimpse of the cosmic laughter that's been playing all along the sound of the universe, delighting in its own magnificent game. The sound of awareness remembering itself through you, the sound of the cosmic joke finally understood,